Hello world, welcome back to Razor RC. Today we're going to be covering one of the great mysteries of the RC world, and that is 1/10 scale four-wheel drive electric buggies, and we're going to be covering what wheels fit which vehicle. So unfortunately with four-wheel drive buggies, everyone kind of went their own way with the wheels. There are different sizes, different offsets, and they're not all exactly compatible. So we're going to cover that, both front and rear wheels. I also have another video already out there on short course trucks. So if you've got a short course truck and you're wondering which wheel you're supposed to use for your Slash or your Techno or your Losi or SC 6.1 or whatever, go check out that video. That also explains the offsets and the different wheels. So in front of us we have three vehicles, which represents the three main different sizes. On the left we've got the Schumacher Cat L1 Evo. In the center we've got the TLR 224 2.0. And then over here on the right we've got the Team Associated B74. So these are kind of arranged from left to right, which is kind of the shallowest hex backspacing is what it's called, and then the middle, and then all the way over to the deepest hex that you'll find over on the Associated. So we're going to cover the front and rear wheels. Front wheels first, of course. On the left, you have the Schumacher Cat L1 Evo. So I call this the Schumacher offset because I think they were the first one to use this. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the main brand. A lot of the carpet tires from Schumacher all come in this offset. So it's kind of become the standardized, at least carpet offset. So we'll take a look at those real quick. Here's the Schumacher Cat L1 Evo. This is the shallowest hex. So what I mean by shallowest is actually this offset from the inner rim here, or actually it's called the backspace from the inner rim all the way down into that hex down there. So some people call it offset. It's really called the backspace. Offset is supposed to be the offset from the middle of the wheel to the outside, but pretty much people kind of use them interchangeably. So this is the shallowest hex. Then in the middle we've got the TLR 224 hex. It's 1 millimeter deeper. And then finally over to the right we've got the Associated hex, which is another 1 millimeter deeper. Excuse all that dirt inside there. So starting with the Schumacher, this is the shallowest hex. This is also used by X-Ray for the front wheels. It's also used on the brand new 22X4 from TLR that just came out a couple months ago. So this is pretty much your standard. I think they even call it like the FMAR offset, but a lot of the Euro spec, carpet racing, AstroTurf racing kind of uses spec tire, spec offset. So you'll find actually a lot of the European buggies use this offset. So this is the Schumacher offset. Now there's two sizes. One is the actual width of the wheel, and on this guy it's 26.5 millimeters. I measured that with some calipers. And then the actual offset inside is 22.6 millimeters, or backspacing from that outside rim all the way down into that hex. So 22.6 millimeters. Now moving on to the middle, this is what I call the TLR 224 offset or backspace. The TLR I think was the first company to use this. I'm not exactly sure, but most people call it the TLR or 224 offset. So other brands that use this same offset are going to be the HB Racing line, so the D413, the D418, also the Techno, so the EB410 or EB410.2 are also going to use this offset. And then obviously the TLR 224 and 224 2.0. So this is actually a slightly narrower wheel. This one from TLR actually measures 24.5 millimeters in width. So these wheels are actually 2 millimeters narrower, and then the actual backspace is 22.4 millimeters from this inside rim all the way down into that hex. So even though the offset is a little bit shallower than about the same as the Schumacher, because the wheel is 2 millimeters narrower, it ends up being about 1 millimeter deeper overall. I hope that makes sense. You basically take that 2 millimeters, divide by 1, and that's how much more deeper the offset should be. But since it's about the same, it ends up being a 1 millimeter deeper hex. So that's the middle one, 22.4. And then over here on the right is the Team Associated offset. So these wheels also measure 26.5 millimeters, just like the Schumacher. The actual backspacing from this inside wheel is about 24.75 millimeters. So approximately 1 millimeter, again, deeper than the TLR. So the Team Associated offset is also used by Yokomo. and Team Associated. I think that's the only two brands that use this, but someone correct me if I'm wrong. I believe Kyosho is actually completely different. I don't think it's compatible with any of these three, and then especially the rear wheels are. Again, I think the actual offset on the Kyosho rear wheels is the same as like the Associated, but I think the thickness of the wheel is actually different, so incompatible. But Schumacher X-Ray use the Schumacher offset. TLR, the older TLR 22.4s, the HB Racing stuff, the Techno stuff, all use kind of that 22.4 offset, and then Yokomo Associated use the Associated offsets. Okay, and then one more thing I want to cover about the wheels is it is possible to actually run different wheels on different vehicles. So now that I mentioned, the Schumacher is 1 millimeter difference from the TLR, which is 1 more millimeter difference from the Associated. So what that means is if you wanted to run, say, a TLR wheel on your Schumacher, you would need a 1 millimeter deeper hex here, or 1 millimeter thicker hex. Similarly, if you want to run an Associated wheel on your TLR, you would have to add a 1 millimeter spacer or get a 1 millimeter thicker hex. Unfortunately, something like the TLR, they don't actually make a deeper hex, so you can't actually do that. And then reverse, if you want to run a TLR wheel on your Associated, you want to go the other way, right? You want to use a 1 millimeter narrower hex. So instead of a 5 millimeter hex up front, you would want to run a 4 millimeter. If you want to try to run a Schumacher on your Associated, you would actually need to drop 2 millimeters, right? You need to go down to a 3 millimeter hex. Unfortunately, I don't think they actually make a 3 millimeter hex, so that would not actually work, but just kind of some information on how to convert the wheels over. So similarly, if you want to try to run the Schumacher on your TLR, you would have to get a 1 millimeter hex. As you can see with this TLR, there's no way to get a 1 millimeter hex. I think it's probably only 2 millimeters deep as is. So yeah, so kind of a nice way if you want to try to convert some things. So actually, I'm going to try to run a 4 millimeter hex on my Associated. The other thing you'll want to double check is actually the thread depth. So when you try to put on a thicker hex, you're obviously going to run out of threads on the actual axle. You may not have enough to get the actual axle nut on it. Or if you try to put in too deep of a hex, too shallow of a hex, you may actually run out of threads on the inside. As you can see, there's kind of this taper here where the threads go up to there, but then you're going to run out of basically this flat. You're going to end up on more of this flat spot and maybe not actually be able to tighten down the wheel hex all the way, or wheel nut all the way. So yeah, just some things to watch out if you want to try to convert wheels from different vehicles to run them onto your buggy. The other reason you might want to do that is maybe you want to widen the track width. For example, the B74, you can actually move the arms out a little bit, or maybe you want to bring them in a little bit, and you want to still keep the overall track width the same. Maybe you want to run around different wheels that way. So I hope that explains that. That pretty much covers the front, and we're going to get on to the rear wheels now. Okay, we flipped these cars around, and as you can see, we've changed the order a little bit. We're still going from the shallowest hex back spacing all the way to the deepest hex off spacing, and things are a little bit different. Schumacher is still kind of the narrowest or shallowest hex. Team Associated is now in the middle, and you can see the TLR 22.4 has moved over to the right hand side. So on the rear of the vehicles, again, it's pretty similar. Schumacher actually, as far as I know, has basically their own wheel. I think the X-rays are different. Someone confirm if they're wrong, and the Kyoshos are different as well. So for rear wheels, this is the Schumacher offset. In the middle, Team Associated is again compatible with Yokomo. I think Kyosho and X-Ray again are not compatible with the Associated rear wheel offset. And then over on the right, we got the TLR offset, which is going to be the 22.4, basically all the TLR 22.4s, including the 22X4. They did not change the rear wheels on the 22X4, only the front wheels to be compatible with the Schumachers. But in the rears, it's going to be TLR, HB Racing, and the Techno EB410 series. So yeah, that kind of covers the rear end. And the rear ends are a lot closer in space. There's actually only a 1/4 millimeter difference between these two. So between the Schumacher and the Associated, a 1/4 millimeter deeper. And then again, when you move to the TLR, another 1/4 millimeter difference. So they're really, really close. Most people are not gonna, consider that a big enough change to need to change your wheel hexes. But the only jump you might want to consider is actually going from the Schumacher to the TLR, because it's pretty much 1/2 millimeter per wheel, but then when you have two wheels, you're actually changing the overall track width by a full millimeter. So that's why they recommend on something like a TLR, like say the 22X4 comes with 5.5 millimeter wheel hexes in the back. If you want to run Schumacher wheels, they actually recommend going down to a 5mm hex, and that way you keep the overall track width exactly the same, or basically the offset. Now, the wheels are again slightly different. The Schumachers are about 37.3mm in width. They are actually a little bit narrower. Both the Associated and the TLR wheels over here are 38mm in width. So about a 0.7mm difference with the Schumacher wheels. They're just slightly narrower for whatever reason. Not a big deal, but something to be aware of. And then in terms of back spacing, the Associated and the Schumachers are 26.5mm back spacing. So again, that is from this inner lip all the way down to that inner hex. So because the Schumachers are actually a narrow wheel, and even though the back spacing is the same as Associated, it ends up with a slightly narrow overall wheel because it's centered slightly, it's slightly shallower, so it sticks a little bit, so you actually would need a slightly narrower hex. Not a big deal, but about a 1/4mm difference. And then on the TLR wheels, the back spacing is about 26.2mm. So again, about a 1/4mm difference between these two. Since the wheel hexes are actually the same width overall, that's why you get that 1/4mm difference. It's just all in the back spacing. So yeah, that pretty much covers the wheels on all the vehicles, 4-wheel drive buggies. I hope that explains some things to you. For those of you that are looking to find what other wheels are compatible with your buggy, or if you want to play with track width, or you want to run different hexes and see what the effect's going to be, that might help you out. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, subscribe, hit the add notifications button. Look for more videos soon, and thanks for watching.